Welcome to Guardians of the Directory, the Chaosoft podcast dedicated to all things Active Directory management, security, and recovery. I'm Craig Birch, your host, identity security enthusiast, and principal security engineer with over 2 decades of industry experience architecting and securing Microsoft solutions. Well, enough about me. Let's focus on today's discussion. But before we dive into today's topic, make sure you catch our last episode, Active Directory's Dark Side. Underbelly Threats and Shadowy Permissions with special guest Derek Melberg, a 20-time MVP and Active Directory security expert. Well, I'm excited to have John Harper here on our podcast today. He's the founder of Hackers Teaching Hackers. Hey, John, a lot of people probably aren't familiar with Hackers Teaching Hackers. Can you give us a little bit of background?
Yeah, thanks, Craig, for having me on. Definitely love to share more about Hackers Teaching Hackers and a little bit of my background kind of leading up to that. So Hackers Teaching Hackers actually has celebrated technically 10 years as of this last year. We didn't make a big fanfare of it because of COVID kind of eating away. We're not sure, like, was that a year? Was that a year? I don't know. But, it was one of those things where it actually started as 614Con initially was the name of the conference. And we had to rebrand it because a lot of people were coming in from around the nation that, and 614 being the area code of Columbus, Ohio, doesn't resonate with people. They're like, what the heck is 614? I don't know. I mean, you obviously figure it out, but, we wanted to rebrand it to something that was more geared to what we were trying to accomplish, which was, we wanted to be a teaching conference. And that was the crux of 614Con initially anyway. When I founded it, I was up against some political battles actually early on in the cybersecurity industry where companies thought that maybe that I was working for, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but that, they didn't want to share information with other organizations. Like, what we know about security is ours and it's unique to us and no one else knows what's going on. So we're not sharing our trade secrets, if you will. And obviously times have changed. People are definitely more in a, hey, let's share this information because it makes us stronger as a community. But initially when I founded Forcon, the environment was not that friendly. And I actually was threatened with being fired for actually starting the conference. And, they're like, well, you're going to share our secret. I'm like, well, no, I just want to be very general about this. And so it actually started as a very undercover, raw, underground type of feel. It was like a speakeasy. Like, where am I? Like, we were in like this warehouse, grungy next to the airport. Like, am I at the right place? Do I have the secret knock on the door? And then you'd open it up, and it's like, wow, this is super cool. Everybody's here, and we're all sharing information, and it was a lot of fun. I think we had maybe like 60 people the very first year without any advertising whatsoever. And it's obviously grown considerably since then. But, for the first couple of years, that's kind of how it was. And I was just passionate about, hey, we should share this in the community. We have a lot of really great talent here. We need to take advantage of that and not throwing any of our trade secrets around. We're not sharing credit card information or PI. We're not doing any of that. All right. And we want to be above bar on that. And it's amazing how it went from the company that I worked for at the time, kind of being like, hey, we'll fire you if you start this thing, to, hey, can we sponsor? To which I was like, no, of course not. I don't want any of those tentacles in here. You take money, right? You're now on the hook for whatever they want to do. So actually, Hackers Teaching Hackers has been, as we've evolved, we've actually tried really hard to not take a lot of sponsorship dollars because we want to make sure that it stays true to what we wanted to do. And that is really be a teaching conference. We know we have elite ninjas that are there. That's great. And we love them. But also we want to make sure, and then we want to make sure they're getting fed too. But what we want to do is have those elite ninjas turn around and be like, okay, hey, you are an expert. We're tapping you. Why don't you come in, run a village, hands-on, let our attendees know what you know through, like a 15, 20-minute exercise where they can walk through this sheet. You're sitting there as the expert. They can answer questions. You can answer questions for them and help them understand. But we really want people that are just kind of coming in. They need to network. They need to know people in the community across the country, potentially. Who are those people they can lean on and where can they get information from? So, I learn more from hands-on. That's just how I'm built. Talks are great. I love talks. I get a lot out of those too, but I learn the most from hands-on exercises. So, with Hackers Teaching Hackers, it was like this at 614 Con. We've kept it. We have a full day of hands-on villages. Anything you can imagine, whether it's lockpicking, tamper-evident villages, Active Directory hacking, web application hacking, cloud hacking, whatever it is. We have a whole bunch of different villages, and we're expanding that every year to do more. And we kind of switch up those villages a little bit, password cracking, all those kind of things. We want to make sure that people understand how to do them. And this year, we added a sponsorship in kind with SANS Institute. So we actually had several SANS instructors there for an additional 30. It was like a pre-party kind of thing before the conference. And, we wanted to do that at a reasonable price. So it was like $65, I think, for like a 2-hour course. And you could sign up for multiple with SANS instructors. And we're going to expand. It was such a success this year that we are going to absolutely it's going to be like a reunion party for all the SANS instructors that are going to come in. It's going to be a lot of fun to have them all together. So there's more coming with that. And I have to throw out major kudos to John Harper, who actually is the one that's actually organizing Hackers Teaching Hackers as of this last year. He's kind of taken it over fully as the organizer. Always be the founder and always be participating. But, John Harper is going to be taking the reins in the future. But that was his idea. And I love what he's done to expand it. And it's just so cool to see how SANS has gotten involvement in it. And then, of course, the last day is all speakers and that kind of thing. So a lot of great opportunity for people to CTF and network and meet people in the community. So it's just been really cool to see how it's grown. But along that way, just to kind of give you some background on where I'm from and how I got here was I've been in the offensive community for the vast majority of my career. So what is offensive security? Obviously, it's penetration testing, right? We're not just trying to go around and be like, screw you. That's not offensive. We're like, we're attacking the defense, right, to make everybody sharper. What we want to do is, the thing about a penetration testing organization is that you only need to find one way in. And once you've found that one way in, it's not an exhaustive thing. You're going to beat that horse until they close it eventually, right? So if you hire a pen testing company to come in, they'll find one path in. The next year, if you don't fix it, guess where they're going? They're going to open that last report. They're going to the exact same thing they did last year. And if you didn't close it, they're going to find a way back in again, which is why a lot of companies rotate third-party companies. But I've done that as a third party for companies. I've also done that for a lot of organizations professionally where they have their own resources inside. So like Nationwide Insurance, we had still have an awesome penetration testing crew over there. Amazing group of people, that have been connected with what we call the Columbus Collaboratory. Actually, I think they might have rebranded it relatively recently, but it's a conglomerate of all the different large organizations within Columbus, Ohio. So like Cardinal Health and, American Electric Power and things like that. So I've worked for American Electric Power working on the OT side. So power grid stuff, which keeps our lights on. So that was an amazing experience doing that and learning about PLCs and HMIs and how that all works together. And, working with engineers that are like, well, that's not network connected. Why would I work on that? Like do that kind of stuff to all the way at Nationwide Insurance where we're working on more like, PCI requirements and making sure that our customers' data was protected, things like that. But yeah, also I did move away from Ohio for a little while. I was down in Georgia for 5 years. I worked for Home Depot corporate headquarters down there, doing also the same things like cybersecurity and things like that. So been out and about in the community. And as I made those connections, I've just really loved to share those stories about things we've learned at different companies. And everybody's kind of got their spin on it, whether you're retail, financial, or you're like an operational technology utility company. There's just a lot we can learn from each other. So, yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned OT, right? Which is really interesting because in the headlines, you see critical infrastructure always under attack through ransomware groups, going after this older technology that you say that isn't connected to the internet. But yet we find out through headlines that it is connected to the internet. So that was an interesting one to talk about. So you mentioned villages, right? In Hackers Teaching Hackers, you mentioned all these different types of villages. What do you really learn? Like, what are some of the key takeaways that you would learn by participating in some of these villages?
Yeah. So if you've never done any of those type of things, and a lot of people don't get the opportunity to expand into those areas of focus. So like we get a lot of blue teamers or people that would be more, defensive. And we actually probably get more blue teamers, honestly, at Hackers Teaching Hackers now than we do hackers per se, like offensive hackers, which is kind of interesting. And it's like our motto is we're all hackers. We're all learning, but we have something to share. That's the motto. And so I've always firmly believed that we are all hackers, whether you're in a security role or not. We all hack, so to speak, to, move around. So the goal is just to enlighten people to what is possible. Let's diffuse Hollywood and let's show you what actually is possible. Let's walk you through the steps. You're going to do it. And so if you've never cracked a hash before, we'll give you some hashes. We'll show you what utilities you could use on a cracking rig. We'll talk about why and how that's possible. And, you'll be able to see brute forcing techniques, and, you'll be able to learn about munging and leet speak and how we can transform things. And, and then like the kind of the way the future, as we start extending passwords longer and longer, which seems to be like the stopgap. It's like, well, instead of using a password, let's use a passphrase. And then what kind of strategies do we employ for cracking hashes if we're using a passphrase instead of a password? How do we defeat MFA if MFA is enabled? And, so you're going to learn all of those things as you're going in. And so the Hollywood gets removed and you start understanding, okay, this is how it's possible. And then the light bulbs can kind of come on and say, start asking those really intelligent questions that you may not think are intelligent, but actually are. And this is where we are as an industry, which is like, well, why didn't I do this? Or, why didn't I do that? And like, if you do that, why don't I try this? And that's when we start making progress in cybersecurity, is when we're all on the same page and we start asking those, what a lot of people think is stupid questions. It's actually very intelligent questions that we just don't want to ask because our ego gets in the way, or, we think, oh, well, I don't know this stuff. This guy over here knows it. And we have, unfortunately, a really bad situation in the community where there's a lot of imposter syndrome, and it's just riddled in the industry. It's like, well, I don't know anything. You actually do. You know a lot. You don't realize how much you know. And, we need to share that knowledge. So yeah, absolutely. When you get involved with a village, you're going to realize real quickly, oh, I actually know more than I thought I did. Or you're going to learn something new that is going to get you questioning what we're doing at work or what we're doing at home. And
Right.
for sure.
So it's not like in the movies where someone's behind the keyboard, they're taking over every system in the world within 2 minutes. Right? It doesn't work that way in the village.
Well, in my house, I got my techno going on, and like 3-dimensional objects are flying around. Sure, yeah, no, it's not like that at all.
That's an interesting. And obviously, one of the key things is we continuously learn. In my role, in your role, I've been doing Active Directory and directory services for a very long time, and consider myself to be an expert in these areas, but I still learn things every day from people that may not even be experts in this area, that maybe they found a different way in, from different red teamers like yourself, or even purple teamers, and honestly, some of the blue teamers, right, on how to defend against some of these things. So there's definitely that sense of community. You mentioned in the past there wasn't a lot of sharing, but now I feel like that has definitely shifted. There is definitely more willingness to share, not only between the community, but even between corporations, because of the landscape has shifted and they're being under attack from state nations, etc. So that's good information. So you've been in a red teamer. You've gone in and done some pen testing in the past. So could you give us an idea of what that looks like? Specifically, right, our podcast is around directory services and how organizations can be stronger in directory services. Take us through your view of how you can go after directory services, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, that's great. So directory services is absolutely a linchpin. And as a penetration tester, I, of course, had to follow the statement of work, the SOW, right? And you always wanted to try and get an accurate picture of the security landscape. And it was interesting because companies would come at me and be like, attack me like a real attacker would, but only during these hours and only with these resources and only with these accounts if you do get the account. And, so they would like really hone it down to just very minor things. And it's like, well, that's, part of it was sort of teaching businesses that no, like hackers don't work like that, man. Like you're hiring a penetration tester, you need to throw the kitchen sink in because they're not limited in any capacity. and they're going to go around the back door and they're going to find a way back in. And then eventually it's going to come back into scope for what you were talking about and trying to protect. But when you limit it, it prevents you from actually seeing the real way that attackers are going to come after you. And that's how ransomware is continuing to be effective and things like that. And a lot of times because we're not seeing that whole thing. And so when we talk about directory services, that is absolutely something that should be in scope every time. And it's funny because I tell people this time and time again, like if you put Active Directory in scope for a penetration test, I'm going to be done before lunchtime because Active Directory is like historically a dumpster fire. Like it's so bad. Now, like granted, like you always have to kind of level set this too, because a penetration test is not a test of the tester. It's a test of the ecosystem that you want tested. And so a lot of companies, vast majority of them, would say, hey, okay, John, we want you to test this. We're giving you direct LAN access. We're not giving you a system. Well, in a lot of cases, you can plug your Kali Linux system in and good luck, right? And it's like, here's your scope. And it's fair and it's unfair because when you think about that scenario, I didn't have to come in from the internet in a lot of those cases. Now, how easy is it to come in from the internet? I mean, it's actually not too bad, actually. It's a whole nother track to probably talk about. But, when you're jacked in directly from the LAN, they typically don't give you credentials of any kind. And if I'm coming in from the outside, whether it's through a phishing email or something like that, if you click that link, I now have taken the context of your identity. So what permissions or roles do I have when I come in from the internet? Well, it depends who clicked my link. If I'm in the LAN and they haven't given me anybody, it's actually, that's pretty hard too, because you don't have credentials, right? It's actually not hard. But, so, the question is, well, how do you get that sort of access? Well, it depends also on, have they put me in a segmented network? Have they, put me on a NAC port or something like that that's prevented me from actually even getting an IP? Potentially have to bypass that, like through like a printer hack kind of thing or something like that. But either way, once I'm on the LAN, if Active Directory is not properly segmented, I can enumerate all accounts, actually using like utility that I created. It's called Kspray, which is a Kerberos pre-authentication password spraying utility. So if I know or have an idea of what the domain name is, I can essentially brute force and guess accounts, and it'll give me both positive and negative responses to both usernames and passwords. So even if I get the password wrong and I've guessed a correct name on a domain, it'll validate that the account is correct. It'll even tell me if the account's locked out or disabled, right? So those kind of things will help me understand, well, what accounts exist, what domains live where, and I'm not even joined to the domain. I'm using Kali at that point, right?
Right.
That's by the nature of Kerberos. So, then once I'm on, which is usually not too hard to do because there's a lot of unprotected service accounts. There's, a lot of NTLM hash passing that we can do. Potentially we do NTLM relays. All of a sudden boxes start forwarding me NTLM hashes. Then, I'm cracking them with, Hashcat. Using probably Hashtopolis, right? Because, Hashtopolis allows all my friends to play at home and help me, crack hashes or whatever. But anyway, so once I have credentials, I'm authenticating to other systems. I can see through like Nmap and port mapping. I can see what other services and servers and systems are available in the ecosystem that I can reach. I'm authenticating with things like SMB. I'm trying PSExec, which is an interactive login. So if you're like, oh, we don't have interactive login enabled for that service account, well, guess what? I can use PSExec potentially, or I can use API calls. There's a lot of just different things we can do to kind of enumerate the environment. From outside, you have Office 365, which you can try and do, attacking that way too. So there's a lot of techniques that will give you credentials. And so it's pretty trivial, I guess is what I'm trying to say, to make it short and sweet, to get Active Directory credentials in some form or fashion. And then once you have a domain user, just a domain user, you don't even need any privilege, right? You can enumerate the entire directory structure essentially with something like Bloodhound or Sharphound or something like that. And there's other tools out there. I'm just throwing that. Everybody knows Bloodhound.
Sure.
But once I have that, then I can really map that domain infrastructure even more, and I can look for things like, service counts. I can look for Kerberos, where I can do Kerberosing, like if they have pre-authentication disabled, things like that, certificate. issues where maybe if I get privilege, I can abuse certificates and use that to authenticate to systems. So, I mean, Active Directory is ripe with all kinds of misconfigurations and things like that. So it's funny when you talk to people about identity management, they automatically go to, oh, well, we have like a team that goes through and we check, that we're following least privilege and things like that. And I'm like, well, what are you doing for the IDP? Because the IDP itself is so bad. Like, are you testing Active Directory itself, the hygiene of Active Directory? Are you looking, is SID history enabled, right? Can I exploit, trust between domains, right? Are you looking at that? So there's so much more to it than just actual, individual users, right? And then it's so funny, like when we talk to domain admins all the time, like when I talk to them, they a lot of them don't even know about admin SD holder.
Yeah, I mean, it is a hidden gem in Active Directory if you're not familiar with it. So,
yeah. So there's a lot. I mean, people are not looking necessarily. They're not continuously looking for things like plain text passwords that are in sysvol from GPOs. They're not looking at administrative shares the way they should. So there's just tons to audit within Active Directory for sure. I mean, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of nooks and crannies that you have to uncover within Active Directory because, as you mentioned, right, Active Directory, it can be a dumpster fire if not properly managed. It's 25 years old, or soon to be 25 years old, and most organizations have had administrator after administrator in that environment. They all have their own idea of how to secure and manage Active Directory. And let's be honest, up until recent, there wasn't a lot of good guidance on how to secure Active Directory until we started seeing the bad guys really put focus on Active Directory. And really, I would say around the pandemic and everybody moving to the remote workforce, it's really become super active. And now it's like every day you hear almost in the news a new breach, whether it involved Active Directory to begin with or not. It usually ends there to get those privileges, just like a red teamer would go after, right? So once you get your privileges, you get your domain dominance. Now you're showing that organization roughly the past that you went in and exploited, but there's always more usually that you could have exploited as well that you may not put in your report back to them. So it's definitely, it's an interesting position to be in. I've never been on the side of it, on your side, like as a pen tester, but obviously I know a lot around how to go after and exploit it from previous experience. So it's an interesting challenge for organizations to try to solve. So I guess knowing that, I mean, so what advice, would you share with our listeners around, first of all, how they can strengthen around Active Directory, and then maybe also if they're interested in becoming a red teamer, what could they start looking at to, build some of that skills, right? We want to be able to share and give back here.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, so, and that's funny, I forgot Active Directory shares your birthday. And
That's right.
always all Active Directory is. If anyone wants to know, Craig knows all the time. Here's the birthday. But yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot of frameworks out there that exist for testing Active Directory and looking at different controls within AD. Finding a solution like a third party solution, honestly, can help a lot because, and I don't want to just like throw vendors out as the solution, but like there's no substitute for the ability to get real time visibility of changes that are happening in Active Directory. If you're not monitoring that in real time, and I don't mean event logs. Like event logs are great, but they don't show configuration changes.
Sure.
They say something just happened, right? And so having something where you can see, hey, here's what changed, and and when it changed, but also in what order and what was the actual change. That helps. Being able to visually map those attack paths, like with something like a Bloodhound, is super helpful. Looking at those frameworks, which help you understand which of those configurations is a more critical risk. Huge to be able to look at that, but you have to be doing that continuously. It's not like a one and done audit.
Right.
That's just not enough, right? Obviously, you have teams out there that are looking for least privilege, that are trying to make sure that those permissions don't get copied from place to place. And obviously, we all know, like if you're a manager and you get this email, should I approve this access? You just hit approve because you don't know. Those are kind of like rough things to try and like work through. But if you can do, more like with MFA, if you can disable, like shut down those old SMB protocols where, it shuts down NTLM relays and things like that, that's going to be immensely helpful. If you can take advantage of, making sure that accounts are not able to leverage the ability to pull plain text passwords out of memory, right? Like those are the kind of things that you want to take advantage of. You want to audit persistent mechanisms like admin SD holder. These are things that are relatively easy to check. You just have to be aware that they exist and be monitoring for them when they occur.
Right.
Persistent mechanisms exist within Active Directory that make it incredibly difficult to find attackers in there, including things like if I'm in a certain OU, I can like right click on that, go to the security descriptor for that, and under the deny, I can go for list all, and I can deny list all access to everybody. So when I do that, everybody in that OU or that user just disappears.
Right. So you can hide.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
You're gone. You're a ghost, but yet you can still log in an Active Directory. You still have all the same privileges, but there's no PowerShell command or command prompt command that you can run. Like you can't do a net user anymore. You can't pull the user. So how do you audit it? How do you know that when you're doing a least privilege analysis that you actually have the right?
It's a great attack vector, right? I can cover my tracks.
You're there forever, if they can't find you. So, there's
where did John? It's like, where's Waldo, right? Where's John at?
We disappeared. So like a lot of post exploitation type of things, can happen, changing, your domain admin passwords is helpful every once in a while, right? But like there's the CareBTGT password, which you need to make sure you're changing every once in a while as well. With that, the twice, right? To validate those tokens and things like that. So there's a lot of things like that people are not in the practice of. And like when I go in and do an audit on that, like it's like, oh, you haven't changed your CareBTGT password since you stood up the domain 20 years ago or whatever. But yeah. So yeah. And doing things like MFA on critical resources is always going to be huge. Making it easy. Like security is tough as it is, but if you can make security easy for users, like using like a Duo where you don't have to put in like a 6-digit code, you just kind of get a push like, was this you? And I know you could just keep brute forcing it. Eventually,
sure, right?
It makes it harder.
Push attacks. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. But those are some of the things I recommend. Of course, doing penetration testing, making sure that Active Directory is in scope.
Right.
For that test.
That's definitely a good point. I mean, because like you said, most people or some organizations don't put Active Directory in scope. You mentioned cloud as well, right? So obviously with Active Directory being a primary on-prem technology, but we've extended that technology to cloud resources to, Entra ID to support M365 services, but it doesn't just stop there. We may extend that into other IDPs like Okta or AWS for authentication as well. So we've made our attack surface much larger, especially for a red teamer like yourself, to try some different techniques to get in. And obviously, if the red teamers are writing about these, and I see that a lot, right? There's like a new tool that was invented to help red teamers and organizations, but it gets into the wrong hands.
Yep.
Now the attacker has an advantage. I saw something around, there was a new tool around red teaming Microsoft Teams, believe it or not, and how to exploit it from a penetration test. And like I said, I think I did a post on it recently that said it won't be long before this was being used by the bad guys, which didn't really have the intention of doing that, just like DS internals. It was meant for red teamers, but now it's out there, right? So I'm not saying you guys are causing problems with some of these tools you're creating, but they're widely available is what I'm trying to get at. I mean, I can go to GitHub and download pretty much anything now.
Yeah, well, speaking of GitHub and cloud, I mean, that's how attackers are getting in. A lot of times is your DevOps pipeline. I mean, these developers have like God mode access because they ask for unconstrained delegation on things, and they need to be able to test, right, all the things. And so, you go into a GitHub and you find plain text secrets, and they're like, "Oh, I cleaned them out," but they forget that there's like a history, in there a lot of times. And so, attackers, if they have access to that GitHub repo or whatever it is, they can snag those secrets. So a lot of misconfigurations, a lot of credentials to be snagged. And then, like to your point, a lot of times people are syncing those on-prem identities into the cloud, and it's just an echo chamber for misconfigurations to like proliferate into the cloud. And, it's funny because I talked to a couple of companies too, where they're like, well, we're relatively new and we're just going to go all cloud and we're not even going to do the on-prem AD thing. And I'm like, well, that's good, but are you going to do federation? It's like, okay, well, this company over here is using on-prem, and
So identity's not really going away in that regards because, like you said, right, you don't know who you're federating with.
right.
They may be a risk.
Yeah.
And when you federate, that you're giving up a certain part of trust, right? So that's the other thing,
Totally.
which
Yeah.
kind of goes against the whole zero trust principles. But hey,
Sure.
but that's interesting. So I guess let's talk about like if you were starting out in your career and you wanted to get into red teaming, what are some of the things that you might want to start with?
Yeah. So the first thing I always tell people is get involved in the community as much as you can. I know we have a lot going on in our lives. I always like that meme. I'm going through a lot right now, and it's just a picture of an empty lot, parking lot. And we are. I get it. There's no substitute, and we're also kind of a little bit antisocial. I feel like some of the best techies are just very introverted. We're not known for being our extroverted best selves, but we need to get out of our comfort zone. We need to go into like conferences or whatever and find people that we can find. Like, get a mentor, essentially, right? Find someone. You don't have to call it a formal mentorship. There doesn't have to be a framework for it, but know what you want to learn, right? Being a penetration tester is a little bit like being on a Ocean's 11 team, right? There's so much to go after. There's no one person that's going to know all of it. I mean, I've met some really smart people in my time, but I haven't met anybody that knows all of it. And so if you can start figuring out what area are you interested in, is it web applications and APIs? Is it, binary reverse engineering and, that kind of memory analysis, or, what interests you? Is it networking, cloud? And then like really hone in on that, find experts in the industry. Twitter's a great place to go find those people, find out where they're going to be, get plugged in, those kind of things. So community is always the first place I always tell people to go to. There's a ton of really good resources out on the internet. The internet is totally awesome. AI has been immensely huge now too. A lot of times we don't have to go out because AI helps us with a lot of that, but no substitute for the community. And if you really want to kind of get into some of that and you want to know, hey, how good am I at this point? There's a lot of really good resources. When I was going through getting some of the certifications, so I got my OSCP, and I was actually a little sad because I passed it the first time. I kind of wanted to do it again, sort of joking, but not really, because it was so much fun. But so the OSCP is a great certification. It's one of the good ones. So there's the certified ethical hacker. My manager got that years ago. He's not even an attacker really. He just figured out, okay, it's a high level, whatever. But it's funny because that's on the HR filter requirements for companies. So, I laugh, but I'm like, understand what's an HR filter if you're looking for a job, and understand what's going to get you props, right? So CEH, it's an HR filter. Might want to get it. It's a good starting point. I don't know. It's not. No one in the industry is going to be like, "Oh wow, you have this," But if you say, "Hey, I got my OSCP," you're going to. Good job.
So now you have some street cred.
Yeah, I got some credit. Hack the Box is another great place to go. They actually have a certification now that rivals the OSCP, and it's actually it's a little bit cheaper than the OSCP, and you have to do a lot more lateral movement, which is totally something you have to do in the real world. As an attacker, you do have to do proxy chains, and you have to pivot through multiple boxes. So that's definitely a little bit different than the OSCP model, which is like, okay, here's 5 individual boxes that are in a buffer overflow or whatever. You have to, go beyond just, okay, I'm hacking this box. Okay, I got it. I'm hacking this box. I got it. You have to pivot. An Active Directory, of course, is a huge part of that. And the OSCP now includes Active Directory, thank goodness.
It does?
It does.
Nice.
But Hack the Box also does Active Directory, a whole bunch of network segmentation, and you have to pivot laterally. So you start learning how to move laterally and manage shells and system access. It's pretty important to understand how to do a lot of that stuff if you're going to be a red teamer. So
you mentioned Kali, right, as one of your tools, but there's different versions of Kali. There's actually, was it Kali Purple? There's a couple different versions of Kali that can help you get started to kind of play around at home. Anyone that you would recommend specifically?
Not really. Like, so there's a bunch of it. Like, and Cali's not even the only platform out there. There's a couple other ones, but Cali's aim is to make sure you have just the general tools that attackers use a lot. It can be an overwhelming situation because you get on that operating system. It's just an operating system, and yes, you have a lot of those tools in there, but there's a lot of tools that are missing that you are probably going to want. And there's no starting point. It's not like, okay, start. I mean, they're kind of like you hit like the start menu, like like whatever the go menu. It will kind of like walk through what most attackers would follow as part of like a framework for going about discovery of resources, and then like enumeration of those resources, and so getting through the reconnaissance phase to like exploitation and post exploitation and all that, and like how to document that stuff. It's all in there kind of in order that way. But no, there's not necessarily something I'd recommend there. A lot of people talk about like Metasploit, and Metasploit is, there's nothing wrong with Metasploit. It's got a lot of really good things in there. And if you just need to test to see if, like if you need to test, okay, like what's the impact of this exploit on a system, and it exists within Metasploit, then okay, do it, and then test it out. But one of the things that I found that is the most useful within Metasploit is actually multi-handler, because multi-handler allows you to manage multiple shells. And that's really where I see the best use of that. Otherwise, it's kind of like you're giving a kid a bazooka and they're just going to fire everything at it and like not know actually what they're doing with it. And that's dangerous. So, I think learning and understanding what is exploit code, how does it work? You need to understand network stack and applications and how they, are responding to that kind of stuff. So understanding that is going to get you a lot further, so you know what you're doing before you just start launching attacks at things with automated tools. So
awesome.
Be careful.
Any other thing you want to share with the audience as final remarks?
No, just like stay at it. Don't let anybody discourage you. There's a lot of really great resources. Jump in, to the Hackers Teaching Hackers community Discord. If you want to, get plugged in with my community and know more. A lot of really great people in there. Again, our community, we meet annually, so we'd love to have you at the conference. Love to meet you in person. But yeah, no, definitely glad that you joined. Hopefully, whoever is listening to the podcast, just thanks for listening, and definitely connect on LinkedIn if you've got any questions. Follow up. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, John, and really appreciate you for coming on. Like I said, you have a pretty interesting experience, being a red teamer and then really becoming a teacher, right? I mean, that's one of the things that you're giving back. So thanks for giving back to the community. Hope that you have a happy holiday.
Thanks.
If you like this episode of Guardians of the Directory, please be sure to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. This includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. Until next time, stay guarded, stay informed, and be the guardian of your directory.